Hey friends. Okay, so this Scandal of God book is really starting to get real. It's really going for all of my favorite themes in the entire world. It's amazing. And so there's a couple statements. I mean, if I try to recap it, I'll just end up talking for a half hour. So you'll probably have to hear lots of these posts over the next days and weeks. But, man, yesterday, Alan comes out with two kind of back-to-back statements, almost as though they were one statement, but they're really two statements about freedom. And he's talking about, the human context and sort of our perceptions of freedom and differing views of freedom and what freedom even means. And he goes into all kinds of dialogue about autonomy versus communion, in other words, individualism versus collectivism, and how these two things are actually completely intertwined, completely codependent. Not codependent in the negative sense, but like mutually dependent upon each other, and which is one of my favorite themes of all time. Ken Wilber is the first person who really sort of stoked my interest in basically in seeing dynamics in the world as polarities, as polarities which only coexist. They never exist on their own. There's no such thing as collectivism without individualism. There is no such thing as individualism without collectivism. And because polarities are the sort of they're the duality, they're the fundamental nature of the universe expressing itself in principle. Because even the universe, if you imagine the universe is the sort of like in this ball of nothingness, and it opens out just like our face. Look at our face. Our face opens out from a center line. It opens out. The universe opens out into polarities that we think from our point of view are points on a straight line and we figure that they have endpoints. I mean, we don't, if we're not too thoughtful about it, we figure the end of a polarity is the end of a polarity. It's a point, but it's not a point. It's a spectrum that's shading out. At the end of a polarity just shades out. It's the way that all existence unfolds. And so when we view cultural dynamics, personal dynamics, psychological dynamics, energetic dynamics, or God forbid, spiritual processes and dynamics, we're often dealing with polarities. And so that's sort of like the context in which Alan is talking about freedom. And he's kind of debunked the idea that freedom resides in either a kind of hyper-individualistic approach or perspective, or a hyper-collectivist approach or perspective. And then he makes these two statements. He says, freedom only exists when we are answerable to someone or something. And it's like, whoa, what a counterintuitive statement. Because it would seem that being answerable to someone or something would not be freedom. It would actually be the opposite. It would be servitude or subordination. And indeed, if you look at the world, we will often see freedom curtailed by authority. But what he's expressing is there's no such thing as in the case of the American culture. What we assume is freedom is the sort of like hyper individualistic self-actualization capacity, freedom to do as I want, be as I am, freedom to be myself, and freedom to be unencumbered in my being myselfness. And he even quotes John Milton, another one of my favorite all-time thinkers and writers, who talked about the distinction between what he called liberty and license, where liberty is what Milton thinks of as genuine spiritual and cultural freedom, and license is simply unencumberedness to do what I want to do, to follow my own impulses. And he does a beautiful job of sort of describing how license is an enslavement to our inner compulsions, which is exactly what a Sadguru or any other mystic would say. Being free to go through the motions of our internally motivated but highly compulsive behavior is not really freedom. I mean, we can call it that if we want, we can use these words any way we want to, but I really resonate with the folks who are like, no, that doesn't sound like freedom to me. That sounds like slavery to your own compulsions. Instead of being enslaved to someone else's compulsions, you're enslaved to your own compulsions. That really resonates with me, and I think that that's where anybody who has a kind of spiritual practice and who does a fair amount of observation and can see, oh my God, everything I do is automatic. Everything I do, virtually everything. The little slices of unknown that make it into my daily life are so small that I might as well just say I live my entire life in compulsion. And then little by little we peel that layer of compulsion off, and we start to get hopefully a little bit of meditative objectivity and be able to say, wait, here's all my compulsions, here's all the shit I do automatically. Do I want to keep doing it? Do I choose? Are these compulsions serving me? Are they serving the world? Are they healthy? Are they benefiting me? Are they benefiting my fellow man? Are they benefiting the world? Now I have choice over whether or not to engage in the compulsion. And if I really want to, then I can go in and change and mold what I am programmed to do, which is, of course, the kind of process of evolution. I'm talking about it in the kind of psychological realm, but that's basically what evolution does on all scales everywhere. I'm getting distracted because this point is so deep. But so Alan starts with freedom only happens when we are answerable to someone or something. And then he goes on to say, but to the non, what does he say? He says to most people that would sound not like freedom, but like slavery. And then he says, and it would indeed be slavery if that someone or something to which we were answerable were not God, in his terminology, were not God, whose service our only duty or our primary form of service is perfect freedom. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, damn, that's amazing. You almost have the creation story in that, because on the side of the coin where he's saying we don't have freedom unless you are accountable to something or something, someone or something. This is very similar to what Kierkegaard, the philosopher Soren Kierkegaard, talked about with freedom and necessity. He said some people will suffer freedom and some people will suffer necessity. If we have an overabundance of necessity, we're going to feel the pang to be more to have more autonomy. If we have an excess of freedom, of unencumberedness, we will suffer the absence of necessity. So on that side of the coin where he's saying we need accountability in order to be truly free, it's kind of like, this is where my mind goes, but I imagine, why did God create the universe? And I'm not talking about the Judeo-Christian God. I'm talking about, why does consciousness want to exist? Because consciousness doesn't need to exist in order to be. Consciousness is prior to everything that exists. So there's a kind of like, why do we need all this stuff? Why do we need a world? Why does consciousness need a world? Well, because consciousness in a vacuum on its own, in the non-beingness of non-being, doesn't know itself. It only knows itself when there's a world, when there's surfaces to bounce off of. So this is where I get this idea of, or this is what sparks for me, is the ultimate freedom, the freedom of the universe to be in existence, really only can experience itself when there are fixed structures and actual material and actual matter to be reflective. And then step two, and it's slavery unless the thing to which we are accountable is God, or is the source of creation, which is the kind of, which the service unto which is perfect freedom. That's kind of like saying, well, now that the universe has created a world to know itself, it wants to return to itself. It wants to move through the cycles of consciousness, of awareness, the levels of consciousness, and regain its true nature as non-existence. So, because perfect freedom, I mean, can you imagine anything more perfectly free than not existing? Literally no encumbrances, because there's nothing to encumber and there's no one to be encumbered. Also, hard to be free, because free from what? Who's free? What? There's no subject, no object, no nothing. At the same time, that's perfect freedom. So there's this, sorry if this is just like my mind doing what it does, but that paradox, that total paradox of no freedom without accountability, the highest accountability being total freedom, is a kind of lotus flower of thought. It's a lotus flower form of envisioning what life is about, what freedom is about, what the human context is about. It blew my mind when I heard that, when I heard him sequence his way through those thoughts. I was like, wow. And I think, there are some concrete ways in which this kind of influences our thinking, because we don't get that, we don't get the power of that statement unless we are holding open the door to the unknown. And the mystic would say, I'm holding open the door to the unknown so that God can enter. Because a mystic believes in God, has faith, and that faith is the open door. Faith is an open door to the unknown. Now, the religious fundamentalist would say, I know there's a God. I'm holding open the door, and I know exactly who's going to walk through it, and I know what they look like, and I know what they think you should be doing with your life. That's fundamentalism. Faith is keeping that door open, not knowing, and knowing that we don't know, but taking the risk, as I said, as I sort of quoted Alan in a day or two ago in my post. But the fact is, an atheist or a non-theistic spiritual tradition like Buddhism could also also has access to that same space. We can still open a door to the unknown, and what our imagination imagines is beyond that door may be different. It may not be in the language of Christianity or in the language of Buddhism, or it may be in whatever language we filter the world through. But that space of the unknown, as the thing to which we have accountability, is an amazing image to me. That's an amazingly unifying image. And as long as we're willing to switch vocabulary, as long as we're willing to kind of follow the atheist into the way that they imagine that, and follow the Buddhist, and follow the Christian, follow the Muslim, the Hindu, whoever. I'm trying to think of other non-religious ways of thinking about this, but there's plenty. As long as we're willing to listen to that to a foreign or slightly more unknown vocabulary, but follow the gesture of that thought, then this perspective is thoroughly uniting among anybody who keeps the door open to the unknown. Fundamentalists don't really get to play that game, because fundamentalists are not leaving the door open. They're saying they're saying I know, and they're not really letting that unknown in. And of course, if that's what we're used to doing, it's very threatening to let the unknown in, because what's more threatening than the unknown? The unknown is mentally exhausting. It threatens my entire identity. It threatens my sense of security. It threatens the very life, the very breath in my chest is threatened by the unknown. So I get it. I get why it's hard to open that door, but at the same time, what else are we going to do? There's no, it literally always turns out that we don't know. It always does. It's 2022. What we knew, have you ever noticed, like, if you watch a TV show or a movie from like 5 years ago, how dated it seems? When I watched a movie in 1993 that was made in 1988, it didn't seem like it was from another era. But now you watch a show from 6 or 8 years ago, and it feels like it was a different world, because time is moving faster now. But this post is ironically taking much longer than usual, so I'll come back to you about this. But thank you for watching. Man, Alan Jones nailing it. As soon as Scandal of God is out, I will shout it from the rooftops. Anyway, appreciate you. Much love. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you tomorrow.